A heartbeat can be the difference between a normal Tuesday and 153 people falling out of the sky. 30,000 feet above the Rockies, the cabin on Flight 662 was doing what cabins always do, sipping coffee, scrolling phones, pretending turbulence is just a little bump. And in Seat 8A, a woman named Maya Lin looked so ordinary it was almost suspicious. Plain hoodie, worn sneakers, a paperback open like she had all the time in the world. The guy beside her in 8B kept sneaking glances at the book title like he wanted to chat. But Maya gave the universal signal for, "Please don't make me talk." A polite smile and eyes back on the page. Because Maya wasn't here to socialize, she wasn't here to network, and she definitely wasn't here to be noticed. She was here to disappear. What nobody in that cabin could see was the quiet thing she was doing without thinking, counting engine notes under her breath, clocking the rhythm of airflow through the vents, feeling the pressure changes through the seat the way a musician feels a guitar string. She told herself to stop. She told herself she was just a passenger today. Then, without warning, somewhere behind the locked cockpit door, something went wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sudden break in the normal, like the world holding its breath. And at that exact moment, Maya's eyes lifted from the page. Because she heard it. A tiny shift, a note out of place, the kind of sound most people miss, the kind of sound that makes a pilot's stomach drop. She didn't know it yet, but the man flying this plane was about to lose the one thing you can't lose up here, time. And in the next few minutes, the crew would make an announcement they almost never make. They would ask if there were any doctors on board. And then they would ask something even rarer, if there were any pilots. Maya would have a choice, stay silent and hope the kid up front could do the impossible alone, or stand up and expose the secret she came here to hide. So before we jump into what happened next, comment where you're watching from. And tell me this, if you heard that announcement at 30,000 feet, would you volunteer or would you freeze? The crazy part is, 5 minutes earlier, everything felt painfully normal. Flight 662 had that sleepy morning energy, the kind where nobody's fully awake, but everyone's pretending they are. Overhead bins were still thumping shut, jackets were getting stuffed under seats, and the aisles smelled like perfume, coffee, and that weird airport air that follows you onto the plane like a clingy ex. Maya in 8A kept her shoulders relaxed, legs crossed, book open, doing her best impression of regular traveler who definitely doesn't know anything about airplanes. Next to her, the man in 8B had the whole corporate travel starter kit, crisp button-down, shiny watch, business magazine folded like it was part of his identity. He leaned over just enough to be friendly without committing to a real conversation. "Good book," he said, nodding at the cover. Maya gave him the smallest smile that still counts as polite. "Yeah, it helps the time pass." He chuckled. "Work trip," he said, already tired of his own life. "Meetings in Chicago, the usual." Then he pointed at her. "You?" This was the moment Maya could have said the truth, could have dropped the kind of sentence that changes the whole vibe. Instead, she shrugged, casual, almost bored. Just heading to see family. Perfect, clean, uninteresting, and exactly what she wanted. A few rows up, a young dad was wrestling two little kids into their seats like he was trying to buckle in angry octopuses. Across the aisle, an older couple had a crossword spread between them, bickering softly over a 5-letter word like it mattered more than their retirement plan. And sprinkled everywhere were the regular characters of an American flight. The laptop warriors, the headphone people, the ones already asleep somehow, and the person who took their shoes off way too early. Then the flight attendants started moving, smooth and practiced, checking seatbelts, nudging bags deeper under seats, doing that calm, cheerful tone that basically says, "Yes, we're in a metal tube, but let's all act normal about it." At the front, one attendant, Elena Cruz, name tag shining, paused near Maya's row and smiled like she actually meant it. "Morning, everyone. We should be off on time." Maya watched her walk away and thought, good, routine flight, routine crew, routine day. This was exactly what she came for. The plane rolled out, the engines rose, and the runway rushed underneath them like a dark ribbon. When they lifted, the cabin did that familiar little lean, stomachs floating for a second, then settling back into the seats. The seatbelt sign stayed on, people quieted, and Maya let her forehead rest lightly against the window for just a moment. She could feel the climb in her bones, but she kept her face neutral. Just another passenger. Just another Tuesday. Just another flight. Maya's just visiting family line was smooth, but it wasn't true. Not the full truth, anyway. Because Maya Lin wasn't a nervous flyer, and she wasn't one of those people who claps when the plane lands. She was the reason planes land. Off duty, out of uniform, hair tied back, face relaxed like she belonged in seat 8A, she was hiding something most people would never guess. She flew jets for a living, the big ones, the ones that make the airport windows rattle when they taxi past. Not as a hobby, not as a my uncle has a small plane kind of thing. As in, thousands of hours in the sky, years of early mornings and late nights, emergency drills burned into muscle memory, and the kind of calm you only earn after you've watched weather turn ugly and still brought everyone home. But today she wanted none of that. She'd just finished a training conference, the kind where you spend 3 days inside a simulator practicing the worst day of your life on repeat. Engine failures, smoke, alarms, checklist after checklist, until your brain feels like it's been sanded down. So when she boarded this flight, she made a decision. No small talk about aviation. No, oh, you're a pilot. Tell me if turbulence means we're dying. No wide-eyed strangers treating her like a walking safety briefing. She didn't even bring her usual flight bag. No fancy headset in view. No crew badge. Nothing that said, I belong up front. Just a paperback and a hoodie and a plan to be invisible. Maya had learned the hard way that once people know what you do, they start watching you like you're a weather radar. They judge your face when the plane bumps. They search your eyes when the engines change pitch. And if you look even slightly concerned, suddenly you're responsible for everyone's fear. So she practiced a special kind of calm, the kind that says, I am ordinary, please forget I exist. That was the deal she made with herself. One quiet flight, one normal day. And it was working. Until that tiny sound shifted. That tiny wrong note in the background. And the part of her that she tried to bury, the pilot part, sat up wide awake like it had been slapped. Tell me to start segment 4, backstory in the cockpit, and I'll write it next. Up front, behind that locked door and the polite illusion of safety, the cockpit had its own world. 2 seats, a wall of glowing screens, and the kind of quiet that only feels peaceful when nothing is going wrong. The captain today was Captain Daniel Kerr, late 50s, the type with silver hair and hands that moved like they'd done the same dance for decades, because they had. 30 years in the air gives you a certain confidence, not the loud kind, the calm kind, the kind that makes younger pilots feel like everything will be fine just because you're sitting there. Beside him was the first officer, Evan Brooks, 29, sharp, focused, still young enough to double-check everything, but experienced enough to do it without looking nervous. He was the kind of guy who kept his pins lined up, his checklists neat, and his voice steady on the radio. Clear skies all the way to Chicago, Evans said, eyes scanning the instruments like a habit he couldn't switch off even if he tried. Captain Kerr gave a small grin. Love these easy weekday hops. And he meant it. Short route, decent weather, a jet that behaved, and a schedule that didn't punish them. What Evan didn't know, what nobody else knew, was that Captain Kerr had been quietly wrestling something for days. Not a big dramatic symptom, nothing that screams ambulance. Just a tightness now and then, a pressure in the chest that came and went like an annoying knock at the door. Captain Kerr told himself it was stress. His daughter was getting married soon. There were phone calls, costs, family drama, the whole circus. And his last medical check had been clean. Only 6 months ago, paperwork stamped, heart fine, cleared to fly. So this morning, he did what a lot of hardworking people do when their body whispers a warning. He ignored it. He sat tall, ran the pre-flight checks, called out the numbers, moved through procedures like clockwork. Because in his mind, it wasn't pain, it was just life. At 9:15, the aircraft pushed back, a narrow-body jet full of everyday people who believed routine meant safe. Evan handled the radios. Captain Kerr handled the bigger picture, and the autopilot would soon take the workload down to a quiet hum. Everything was normal. So normal that Captain Kerr even made the friendly announcement once they were climbing, the practiced voice that makes passengers loosen their shoulders. He told them the altitude, the smooth ride, the early arrival, all the comforting details people love. And for a while, it was true. At cruising altitude, with the autopilot steady and the sky wide open, Captain Kerr leaned back and started reviewing their arrival procedure, calm, capable, in control. Then he reached for his bag. Just a simple movement, nothing urgent. And that was the moment his body stopped whispering and started screaming. Back in the cabin, the world stayed calm in that fake way planes do, like everyone is collectively agreeing not to think too hard about where they are. At 30,000 feet, normal is a performance. The seatbelt sign clicked off. People unbuckled with that little sigh of freedom. A couple stood up immediately like the aisle was their birthright. And somewhere behind Maya, a bag thumped open as snacks came out like it was a picnic in the sky. Elena, the flight attendant, rolled the drink cart forward with a smile that had probably survived 1,000 flights. Coffee, juice, water? Maya ordered coffee with cream, simple, quiet, no extra conversation. Exactly the kind of boring moment she'd paid for. The guy in 8B started chatting across the aisle about restaurants in Chicago. The older couple argued gently over their crossword again, and the kids a few rows up got distracted by clouds like they were watching a magic show. It should have felt peaceful, but Maya couldn't fully sink into the story in her hands. Not because she was anxious, because she was trained. A pilot doesn't hear an engine. They hear a pattern, a steady note, a certain rhythm, a background texture that becomes so familiar you only notice it when it changes. And something changed. Not enough to make heads turn. Not enough to make the cart rattle. Not enough to make anyone spill their coffee. Just a slight shift in pitch, like a singer hitting a note a fraction too sharp. Maya froze for half a second, eyes still on the page, brain suddenly doing math she didn't ask it to do. Altitude, thrust, airflow, vibration, the invisible checklist that runs in the back of a pilot's mind even when they swear it won't. She forced herself to breathe. You're off duty. You're not working. You're just a person in seat 8A reading a book. She turned the page like the sound didn't matter. Then it happened again. A tiny wobble in the engine note, the kind that rides under everything like a warning you can't unhear once you catch it. Maya's fingers tightened on the paperback. Her eyes flicked to the window, to the wing, to the clouds, as if she could see sound. Outside, everything looked perfect. The wing was steady, the sky was bright, the horizon straight. Inside, everyone stayed wrapped in their own little worlds. Scrolling, sipping, laughing quietly, sleeping. And that's what made it worse. Because Maya knew the most dangerous emergencies don't start with screaming. They start with small things nobody notices. A sound that's slightly wrong. A silence that lasts too long. A feeling you can't explain, but you don't ignore. She told herself she was imagining it, that 15 years of flying had made her hypersensitive. But her body didn't believe her. Her heart beat a little faster. Not panic, not fear. Recognition. And somewhere beyond the cockpit door, in the place passengers never see, the real problem was already unfolding. The comm cabin didn't know it yet, but the clock had started ticking. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Kerr tried to act like nothing was happening. He shifted in his seat, rolled his shoulders once, like he could shake the feeling off. Then the pain hit properly. Not a dull ache. Not, maybe I slept wrong. It was sharp, crushing, immediate, like a heavy fist closing around his chest from the inside. He reached toward his flight bag and stopped mid-motion, fingers suddenly stiff. Air caught in his throat. Evan Brooks glanced over, half automatic, half concerned. "Captain, you all right?" Daniel tried to answer, but the words wouldn't line up. His face drained of color so fast it looked unreal. A thin sheen of sweat popped across his forehead like someone turned on a switch. Evan's comm snapped into focus. "Captain, talk to me." Daniel's eyes blinked once, slow and unfocused. Then his body gave up. He slumped forward in the seat, chin dropping toward his chest, hands sliding uselessly away from the controls, breathing turning shallow and uneven. For 1 second, Evan just stared, because your brain always wants to deny what it's seeing. Then training took over like a hard slap. He grabbed the yoke, steadied the aircraft, eyes bouncing between the instruments and the man beside him. This wasn't a take-a-minute situation. This was a life-or-death emergency at cruising altitude with a cabin full of people who thought today was normal. Evan keyed the microphone, and his voice came out tighter than he wanted. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday, Denver Center. This is Flight 662. We have a medical emergency. Captain is unconscious, requesting immediate clearance to the nearest suitable airport." The response came back fast, crisp, professional, the kind of voice that tells you the system just shifted into emergency mode. Flight 662, Roger Mayday. Turn right heading 090. Descend and maintain flight level 280. Nearest airport is Mesa Ridge Regional, 80 miles southeast. Emergency services will be standing by. Evan's hands moved. Autopilot inputs. Heading change. Descent initiated. But the workload didn't get lighter, it got heavier. Because now he had to fly, talk, diagnose, run checklists, and manage a cockpit that suddenly felt too small for one person. He leaned toward Daniel, checked for breathing, saw it. Weak, but there. And he made the call no pilot wants to make, the one that admits you can't do this alone. He hit the intercom. Cabin crew to the cockpit immediately. Out in the aisle, Elena Cruz heard that tone and felt her stomach drop. Not the words, the voice. A strained voice from the cockpit is never a small thing. She moved fast, leaving the drink cart parked like a forgotten prop, weaving around passengers, keeping her face controlled because panic is contagious. When she pushed into the cockpit, the scene explained everything in one glance. Captain slumped, first officer rigid with focus, alarms not screaming but the tension in the air loud enough. What happened? Elena asked, already reaching for the captain's wrist. Evan didn't waste time. I think he's having a heart attack. I need help moving him, and we need a doctor now. Elena's fingers found a pulse, faint and irregular. He's alive, but it's weak, she said, voice steady because that's what you do when you're scared. Evan swallowed, eyes still on the instruments. Make the announcement, ask for medical personnel, and ask if there are any qualified pilots traveling. Tell them to come forward immediately. Elena nodded and was already backing out. A minute later, her voice came through the cabin speakers, clear and controlled, but you could hear the edge under it if you listened closely. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency on board. If there are any doctors, nurses, or medical personnel, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. And if there are any qualified pilots traveling as passengers, we would appreciate your assistance. That single sentence changed the temperature of the entire plane. Heads snapped up, conversations died mid-word, phones lowered. In 8A, Maya's book might as well have turned to stone in her hands. Because when a crew asks for a pilot in the cabin, it usually means one thing. Something has gone wrong up front. And whether she wanted it or not, her quiet flight was over. The cabin didn't erupt into chaos, not at first. It did something scarier, it went quiet. Not total silence, but the kind where every tiny sound suddenly feels too loud. The rustle of a snack bag, a cough, the squeak of a seatbelt buckle. People looked around like they expected answers to be sitting in the aisle. The businessman in 8B leaned toward Maya, voice low. Did she just say they need a pilot? Maya kept her expression neutral, but her pulse had already kicked up, because she knew what most passengers didn't. Airlines don't ask that unless they're running out of options. Up the aisle, a woman raised her hand. I'm a nurse, she called out, trying to sound confident even as her eyes darted toward the front. Elena appeared immediately, relief flashing across her face for half a second before she masked it. Thank you, please come with me. The nurse grabbed her bag and followed fast, disappearing toward the cockpit. And as soon as they were gone, the cabin filled with whispered fear. What's happening? Is the captain okay? Are we going down? Why would they need a pilot? A kid started asking questions too loudly. The dad shushed him, and the older couple stopped caring about their crossword entirely. Maya sat still, book closed now, fingers resting on the cover like it might anchor her to the seat. This was the moment she'd been trying to avoid. Because once you stand up, you're not a passenger anymore. You become a resource, a tool, a person the crew will lean on. And Maya wasn't afraid of helping. She was afraid of the weight of it. If she walked forward and something still went wrong, people would remember her face. They'd remember the pilot lady. They'd remember that she was there when it happened. And yet, she could already picture the cockpit. One first officer trying to fly, talk to air traffic control, run checklists, manage an unconscious captain, coordinate medical care, and keep 153 souls alive. Even the best pilot on Earth would feel that pressure. And pressure makes mistakes easier. Maya took one slow breath, then another, like she was giving herself a final chance to pretend this wasn't her problem. Then she looked at the call button beside her armrest. A small plastic switch that suddenly felt like a lever that could change the whole story. She pressed it. The light above her seat clicked on, calm and ordinary, like the plane didn't understand what was happening. A moment later, Elena returned from the front, moving fast, eyes scanning the cabin like she was hunting for hope. She stopped at Maya's row. Yes. Maya kept her voice low, controlled, private. I'm a commercial pilot, she said. I'm current on this aircraft. If you need me, I can help. For a split second, Elena just stared like she didn't want to believe she heard that correctly. Then her shoulders dropped with pure relief, like someone finally took a heavy bag off her back. Thank you, Elena said, and you could hear how close her voice was to cracking. Please, come with me now. Maya stood, sliding past the businessman in 8B. Every head in the surrounding rows turned. Not because they knew who she was, but because in that moment, her movement meant one thing. Something serious was happening, and someone was finally doing something about it. As Maya stepped into the aisle, she caught the businessman's eyes. He looked stunned, like he'd been sitting next to a fire extinguisher and only just realized it. Maya didn't smile, didn't reassure, didn't promise anything she couldn't guarantee. She just followed Elena toward the cockpit, steady, focused. Because the turning point wasn't the announcement. The turning point was a choice, and Maya had made hers. The closer Maya got to the front, the more the plane felt different. Not louder, not shakier, just tighter, like the air itself knew something was wrong. Elena didn't chat, didn't explain. She just moved with purpose, one hand braced on seatbacks as the aircraft began a shallow descent. When they reached the cockpit door, Elena tapped the code, swung it open, and Maya stepped into a scene that looked calm only because professionals were forcing it to be. Captain Daniel Kerr was slumped in his seat, chin low, skin grayish, sweat on his temples, breathing there but thin, like the body was rationing what it had left. A nurse knelt beside him, fingers on his wrist, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of his chest. And Evan Brooks, the first officer, was doing 4 jobs at once, hands steady on the controls, eyes on the instruments, brain splitting itself between flying and crisis management. The moment Evan saw Maya, his face changed. Not relaxed, not happy. Relieved, in the purest sense, like he'd been holding a weight, and somebody finally grabbed the other handle. Thank God, he said, voice tight. Tell me you're qualified. Maya didn't waste a word. Maya Lin, airline pilot, 8,000 hours, current on this model. Evan nodded once, sharp and grateful. Captain collapsed about 10 minutes ago. We declared Mayday. We're diverting to Mesa Ridge. I need help. Maya scanned the panel, the flight path, the altitude tape, the descent rate, the engine instruments, the autopilot modes. The aircraft was stable, but the cockpit workload was brutal. Put me on radios, Maya said, already reaching for the spare headset. You fly, I'll manage comms and checklists. Evan exhaled hard, like he'd been waiting for permission to stop drowning. Done. Maya slid into the jump seat, snapped on the headset, and the world narrowed into crisp audio and procedure. Denver Center, Flight 662. She transmitted, voice calm, clean, controlled. We're continuing diversion to Mesa Ridge Regional. Request priority handling and emergency services standing by on arrival. The controller came back immediately. Flight 662 Roger. Emergency services will be standing by. Say souls on board and fuel remaining. Maya didn't even look down. She already knew Elena would have briefed her, and Evan had the numbers. 153 souls on board. Approximately 1 hour fuel. A tiny thing, that tone, but it mattered. Because comm on the radio doesn't just inform air traffic control. It tells everyone listening that this cockpit is still functioning. Maya turned to Evan. Where are you in the abnormal checklist? Evan's jaw flexed. Working through it, but I can't leave the controls. Then read. I'll run, Maya said. She pulled the emergency checklists, moved through them like stepping stones across a river, verifying autopilot configuration, confirming descent planning, making sure nothing was missed because panic makes you skip steps. Behind her, the nurse spoke quietly. Pulses weak but present, still unconscious. Maya nodded once, eyes still on the instruments. Keep him stable, we'll have paramedics at the gate. The airplane dipped a little more, the descent rate increasing as they were given priority. Evan's voice stayed professional, but Maya could hear the strain under it. I've done single pilot sims, but not like this. Maya didn't sugarcoat it, but she didn't feed fear either. Yeah, "This is real," she said. "But you're flying fine, and now you're not alone." Another call came through. Flight 662, cleared direct Mesa Ridge. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Maya repeated it back, entered it, verified it. Then she leaned slightly toward Evan, keeping her voice low so it didn't crowd his headspace. "Next 5 minutes, we focus on 3 things: airplane control, path, and setup for approach. Everything else is noise." Evan nodded, shoulders still tense but steadier now. At the cockpit door, Elena appeared again, eyes wide but trained. "Passengers are getting scared," she said. "Do we tell them anything?" Maya and Evan shared a quick look, the kind pilots use when words would waste time. Evan answered, "Tell them we're diverting as a precaution for a medical emergency. Aircraft is operating normally, landing in about 30 minutes." Elena nodded and disappeared back into the cabin. Maya returned to the panel, to the radio, to the checklist. Because this was the hard part. Not the mayday, not the announcement. The hard part was staying sharp while the clock ticked. Staying precise while a man's heart failed beside them. And guiding a jet full of strangers down to the ground like nothing else mattered. Because right now, nothing did. The descent tightened the cockpit into a tunnel. Outside the windshield, the sky was still bright and indifferent, but the instruments were now the real horizon. Maya kept her voice steady on the radios while Evan flew like his life depended on it, because in a way, it did. "Mesa Ridge approach, Flight 662, medical emergency, requesting vectors for ILS runway 29er, Maya said, crisp and controlled. The controller answered like they'd already cleared the chessboard for them. "Flight 662, turn left heading 270, descend and maintain 8,000. You're 15 miles from the outer marker. Cleared ILS runway 29er. Maya read it back, eyes already moving, confirming the approach frequency, setting the course, cross-checking the glide slope. Evan's hands never stopped moving, small corrections, stable attitude, disciplined airspeed. This wasn't the dramatic part that movies show, no screaming alarms, no shaking cabin. It was worse. It was quiet competence under pressure. Behind them, the nurse stayed with Captain Kerr, voice low, measured. "He's still out. Pulse is weak, but steady." Maya nodded without turning. "Keep him as stable as you can. We're minutes out." Evan swallowed hard, then forced his voice into routine callouts, like muscle memory could overpower fear. "Approach checklist," he said. Maya responded instantly. "Approach checklist, altimeters set, briefing complete, landing data confirmed." The aircraft pierced a thin layer of cloud, sunlight flashing across the glass. Then the ground appeared, brown winter fields and a strip of runway cutting across it like a promise. In the cabin, Elena made the announcement exactly as planned, calm, confident, controlled. But even through the cockpit door, Maya could feel the tension rolling backward, passengers bracing, imagining worst-case scenarios. Maya kept her focus where it belonged. Configuration, stability, timing. "Speed checks," Evan called. "Checked," Maya replied, watching the airspeed trend. "Flaps 1. Flaps 1, Maya echoed, moving the lever, verifying indication. The jet settled into landing configuration like it had done 1,000 times before, which it had. But this time, there was no margin for sloppy work. "Mesa Ridge Tower, Flight 662 on the ILS 29er, medical emergency, request emergency vehicles," Maya transmitted. Tower came back immediately. "Flight 662, wind 280 at 7, runway 29er cleared to land. Emergency equipment is standing by." That one sentence, "cleared to land," hit like a turning key. No more options, no more time. Evan's eyes locked down the runway. "Maya, I've got it," he said, voice tight but steady. "You've got it," she confirmed, because in a cockpit, clarity is kindness. "Gear down," Evan commanded. Maya moved fast. "Gear down." A beat, then the 3 greens lit. 3 green, no red. "Flaps 30. Flaps 30 set." The jet slowed, stabilized, and the runway expanded in the windshield, coming toward them fast. For a moment, Maya caught Evan's reflection in the glass, his jaw clenched, eyes intense. A young pilot doing the hardest landing of his career with a man's life fading beside him. 500, the automated voice called. Maya's heart thumped once, hard. then settled. Stable, she said, more to anchor the moment than to state the obvious. Minimums, the system announced. Continue, Evans said. Then the wheels met the runway. Firm, controlled, clean. The thrust reversers roared, the aircraft decelerated, and for the first time in 20 minutes, the cockpit felt like it had space to breathe. Evan guided them off the runway and onto the taxiway where a line of flashing red and blue lights waited like an army. Maya keyed the mic. Tower, Flight 662 clear of the runway. Roger, Flight 662. Taxi to gate. Emergency vehicles will follow. As they rolled, paramedics were already running alongside, gear in hand, faces focused, ready. Maya looked back at Captain Kerr, still unconscious, still fighting. They hadn't solved the problem, but they'd done the one thing that mattered most. They got everyone on the ground. The moment the jet stopped at the gate, the cockpit door opened, and the whole aircraft seemed to exhale at once. Paramedics rushed in with purpose, not panic, sliding past Maya and Evan like they'd rehearsed this exact dance. They checked Captain Kerr, attached monitors, spoke in clipped medical phrases that sounded calm but urgent. Maya stayed out of their way, but she didn't look away. Because you don't walk out of a moment like that pretending it didn't happen. Within minutes, Captain Kerr was on a stretcher, oxygen mask in place, moving down the aisle with Elena and the nurse beside him. Passengers leaned into the aisle, eyes wide, some whispering prayers, some just staring, frozen by the reality that medical emergency wasn't a vague announcement, it was a human being. Evan made the cabin announcement with a voice that was trying very hard not to crack. Ladies and gentlemen, we've landed safely in Mesa Ridge due to a medical emergency. Medical teams are now assisting our captain. We'll provide updates as we receive them. No dramatic speech, no hero talk. Just facts, because facts keep people steady. Maya walked back toward her seat and felt the weight of the cabin's eyes. Not in a celebrity way, in a survival way. People look at whoever stood up during the storm. The businessman in 8B stared at her like his brain was still buffering. You're a pilot? Maya gave him a small shrug, the smallest version of the truth. Yeah, I just helped. If she'd said more, it would have turned into a whole thing. And she was exhausted in the particular way you only get after adrenaline drains out of your bones. On the tarmac, the paramedics transferred Captain Kerr into an ambulance, lights flashing, siren muted at first, then fading into the distance. Inside the jet, the crew shifted into the next problem. How do you get 153 people to their destination when the captain is headed to a hospital? Evan met Maya at the cockpit door, eyes red around the edges. You saved me up there, he said quietly. I mean it, I was managing, but you took the pressure off. I don't know what happens without you. Maya didn't let him put her on a pedestal, because that's not how professionals survive. You did the hard part, she said. You flew the airplane, you declared Mayday. You got us down, I just helped organize the chaos. Evan shook his head. Still, thank you. Airline ops confirmed a replacement captain was being sent in from Denver, about 2 hours out. Maya could have returned fully to passenger mode. Headphones on, eyes down, waited out. Instead, when Evan asked if she'd stay available for the continuation flight, she answered without hesitation. If you need me, I'm here. 2 hours later, a replacement captain arrived, briefed quickly, and the flight continued to Chicago like nothing had happened. Except everything had happened. The cabin was quieter now, not fearful, just thoughtful. People speaking softly, looking at each other like strangers who had survived the same story. When they finally landed in Chicago, passengers filed out slower than usual, and one by one, a few stopped near Maya's row. Thank you. You were so calm. I was terrified until I saw you stand up. Elena caught Maya near the exit, eyes glossy but smiling. You made all the difference, she said. Truly. Maya nodded. I'm just glad he made it to the ground alive. That night, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from the airline's chief pilot. He'd heard what happened, told her she'd done an outstanding job, and that Captain Kerr was stable in the hospital and expected to recover with surgery. Maya stared at the text for a long moment, then set the phone down like she didn't want the praise to stick to her skin. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at her apartment. Inside was a handwritten letter, old school paper, careful pen strokes. It was from Captain Daniel Kerr. He thanked her for stepping in, for helping Evan, for giving him a chance to see his family again. He wrote that the doctors said time was everything, and the quick diversion changed the outcome. Maya sat at her kitchen table with the letter in both hands, strangely quiet. Not proud in a loud way. Not emotional in a dramatic way. Just moved. That same week, Evan called her, voice brighter, lighter, like the weight had finally started to lift. They recommended me for captain training, he said, still sounding like he didn't fully believe it. They said the way I handled the emergency showed I'm ready. Maya smiled, genuine this time. You earned it, she told him. You kept your head when it mattered. Then he added, there's more. They want to turn what happened into a crew resource management case study. Interviews, training, the whole thing. They want both of us. Maya agreed, because if your worst day can become someone else's lesson, it's not just trauma, it's value. A local news station picked up the story too, calling her the hero pilot in seat 8A, interviewing passengers who kept saying the same thing. She looked normal. She was reading a book. And then she just stood up. Maya watched the segment once, then turned it off. Not because it was wrong, because it was incomplete. The real story wasn't the cameras, it wasn't the labels. It was a locked cockpit, a fading heartbeat, a young first officer carrying an impossible load, and a choice made in a narrow aisle. 2 months after the emergency, Maya got a call from Captain Kerr himself, his voice stronger now, grateful but steady. I'm cleared to fly again next week, he said. And I have one favor to ask. Maya paused. Okay, when I do my first flight back, would you sit in the right seat with me? He asked. Be my first officer, it would mean a lot. Maya didn't answer fast, not because she didn't want to, but because the moment landed heavy. A man asking the person who helped save his life to be beside him when he trusted the sky again. I'd be honored, she said. A week later, there they were, a different morning, a different flight, same kind of jet. Maya in the first officer's seat, Captain Kerr beside her, hands steady, eyes clear, alive. They ran the pre-flight checklist with the ordinary cadence of routine, but underneath, it was something deeper. When Maya finished the last item, she looked over. Ready for takeoff, Captain? Captain Kerr smiled, small and real. Ready when you are, and Maya, thank you for the second chance. The plane lifted into the sky smoothly, climbing into sunlight like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. But Maya knew better. And that was the point. You never know when the ordinary turns into the unthinkable. You never know when you'll be asked to step up. And you never know which random Tuesday becomes the day you change someone else's life. Sometimes the most important flight is the one you weren't even supposed to work.